Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV Science Fiction and Fantasy Edition. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Dungeons & Dragons has been an underground Saturday night basement pastime for decades now, but in 2022 went mainstream when the worldwide smash hit series Stranger Things featured it front and center in their fourth two-part season. And according to Lightspeed magazine, fantasy legend R.A. Salvatore created perhaps the most popular character in the history of Dungeons & Dragons, a dark elf named Drizz Do'Urden, who D&D readers first met in the Crystal Shard, the kickoff to the Icewind Dale trilogy way back in 1988, followed by successful sequels Streams of Silver and The Halfling's Gem. Yahoo News reported that after the success of the Icewind Dale trilogy and the immense popularity of its breakout star, Drizz Do'Urden, R.A. Salvatore was inevitably going to explore how one non-evil drow elf in the Forgotten Realms became, non-evil. The result was the Dark Elf trilogy, which began with Homeland. It was by far my favorite Dungeons & Dragons novel when I was a kid, and now 30 years later it still is. Expanding his world with that Dark Elf trilogy, which co-starred Homeland, Exile and Sojourn, featuring Canticle in Sylvan Shadows, Night Masks and the Chaos Curse, including The Legacy, Starless Night, Siege of Darkness, and Passage to Dawn. The Paths of Darkness series with the Silent Blade, the Spine of the World, and the Sea of Worlds. Salvatore's trailblazing and world-building continued with the Sellsword series, featuring Servants of the Shard, Promise of the Witch King, and Road of the Patriarch. The Hunter's Blade trilogy with the Thousand Orcs, the Lone Drow, and the Two Swords. Kicking off the 2000s with the War of the Spider Queen series that featured Dissolution, Insurrection, Condemnation, Extinction, Annihilation, and Resurrection, Salvatore continued to dominate as what Publisher Weekly reported by them was a top author of fantasy adventure, continuing to entertain new generations of D&D fans with new trilogies like Transitions with the Orc King, the Pirate King, and the Ghost King, the Stone of Tymora trilogy with the Stowaway, the Shadow Mask, and the Sentinels, featuring Gauntlegrim, Neverwinter, Sharon's Claw, and the Last Threshold, the Companions Codex including Night of the Hunter, Rise of the King, and Vengeance of the Iron Dwarf, Homecoming with Archmage, Maestro, and Hero, Generations co-starring Timeless, Boundless, and Relentless, and The Way of the Drow more recently with Starlight Enclave, Glacier's Edge, and the Tao of Drizzt. ScreenRant.com recently pointed out of his vast influence within the past 40 years of D&D through today that as Salvatore's worlds created in the books have become so inextricably linked for fans to the game world, the Dungeons & Dragons 5e uses the Forgotten Realms campaign setting as the default location for games, thanks to both its popularity and lore. There are a few reasons for the popularity of the Forgotten Realms compared to other D&D settings. There have been many D&D novels released over the years, and they've been set across the different campaign settings. But the most popular by far is the Legend of Drizzt series by R.A. Salvatore. The story of Drizzt going from an outsider to one of the most celebrated heroes in Faerun helped the D&D novels find an audience outside of the tabletop game, and Drizzt still heavily features in the D&D media. Drizzt is likely the most popular D&D character of all time, and his prominence helped make the Forgotten Realms a popular choice for D&D campaigns. Today, having gained as many mainstream fans as insiders who've been so for years, the Washington Post Book Review celebrated The Color of Dragons as packed with fighting, intrigue, suspense, and thrills. It's a compulsively readable fantasy novel. Readers of fantasy novels will simply rejoice. While Wired reported in 2022 that as a consequence of that prolific output, fantasy writer R.A. Salvatore has sold 17 million copies of his books, written over some 50 novels, 24 of which have been New York Times bestsellers, and amid all his own success, Salvatore was tapped by George Lucas to novelize the massive worldwide blockbuster Star Wars II: Attack of the Clones, along with contributing to the Star Wars literary galaxy with Vector Prime, the kickoff book of the new Jedi Order series, before introducing fans to another original world of Corona with the Demon Trilogy, featuring the Demon Awakens, the Demon Spirit, and the Demon Apostle, the bridge novel Mortals, and the second trilogy with Ascendants, Transcendents, and Immortals, the Saga of the First King series featuring the Highwaymen, the Ancient, the Dame and the Bear, and the Coven with Child of a Mad God, Reckoning of Fallen Gods, and Song of the Risen God. Salvatore's staggering library additionally includes standalone series like The Spear Wielder's Tale with The Woods Out Back, The Dragon's Dagger, and The Dragon Slayer's Return, The Chronicles of Ynisael co-starring Echoes of the Fourth Magic, The Witch's Darkness and Bastion of Darkness, and the Crimson Shadow series featuring the Swords of Bedwyr, Luthien's Gamble, and the Dragon King. And he takes out time today to talk about his massive career and catalog. Robert, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us. Is it safe to assume you were a D&D fan as a kid? And did you grow up playing any other games of significance as they go on to influence your writing within that world as an author?
It was, geez, before I even got to kindergarten, I was reading the Peanuts books by Charles Schulz. I have a whole bunch of them right behind me, actually, on one of the shelves from the early '60s, first edition Peanuts. And that was really it for me. That and some comic books, and the basic Wind in the Willows, Watership Down. I remember reading when I was a little older, and then I stopped reading. I was only reading what I had to read to get the grades because school wasn't giving me anything to read I wanted to read. But then when I got to college, I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and I remembered how much I used to love reading when I was little, and I started reading again. That was my favorite. Was Fantastic Four. Maybe a little bit, but I think also, I grew up watching Lost in Space was my favorite show as a kid. In fact, I was thrilled when one of my early Demon Wars books was read by Billy Mooney. Uh, you know, Will Robinson from Lost in Space. I mean, that was like a huge like geek out for me. Never got to meet him. Wish I had, but yeah. So I was always, and then I was interested in Apollo, and I watched all of that when I was a young kid. All of everything time the news had anything to do with NASA on it, I was watching. So I really got into that. I mean, I thought I was starting college as a physics major or science major. Fantasy really didn't come along for me until college when I got those books from my sister as a Christmas present. Read them, fell in love with them. Just started reading every fantasy novel I could get my hands on. Very soon after that, my brother started playing D&D with some people at work and asked me to join his group. And we just went from there.
What elements of fantasy do you remember being drawn to early on? And do you remember letting your imagination start to play with any on the page as a young kid?
There's something really nice about thinking you can make a difference in the world. And the fantasy genre is the hero's journey. So, you live on a planet with 8 billion people, things are out of control. Well, is he going to drop a nuke today? I don't know. There's nothing we can do about it, right? How's the economy? Yeah, who knows? You feel kind of helpless sometimes in this world because, there are 8 billion of us. But fantasy really brings it back to the kid in the town can kill the dragon and save the town. You can make a difference in your world. I think that's a big part of it. And the other big part of it is, even though I'm a science geek, I mean, I'm a Carl Sagan fan from 1980. I watched Cosmos 1,000 times. I like the idea that there are things that we can't explain. I used to watch all those Saturday morning shows where the guys would go in the woods and scare the hell out of each other, thinking Bigfoot was behind the tree, or is there really a monster in Loch Ness, or did the aliens make the pyramids and all this other? And I mean, I never believed any of it at all. I just thought it was fun because it's nice to not have the answers to everything. And I think that goes to a very fundamental human thing, right? I mean, if you have all the answers, like what's next after this existence, people seek that. And the surety that we have all the answers can be kind of diminishing in terms of faith and wanting there to be something more. You know what I mean? When I got the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings and I read them, I went to the local bookstore, and this was 1980. Well, I got them in like 77. I started reading fantasy in 78. There was no internet. We had a local bookstore. So I went there and I read pretty much all the fantasy books they had. So it was Little Anne McCaffrey, Terry Brooks, certainly, Stephen Donaldson, Fritz Leiber, Michael Moorcock. That was really it. There were like 10 fantasy books, if that you could get your hands on out here. And so what happened, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons as well. And that was a nice creative outlet for me. But I ran out of fantasy books to read, so I wrote one. And I didn't write it to be published. I just wrote one so that I'd have something, I could share with my friends, or something I could give to my kids, or give to my grandkids, and say, this is your pops. This is something he did.
We're talking, of course, about your path to writing Echoes of the Fourth Magic, which in turn led to you landing the gig to write The Crystal Shard, the kickoff to the now mythic among D&D fans, the Icewind Dale trilogy. Leading up to that victorious point in the launch of your writing career, Wired magazine would correctly note years later in a cover story on the success that followed that the journey from nobody to fantasy fame wasn't easy. Please pull the curtain back for fans on the climb to get there over the course of writing those first two breakthrough novels.
Book? Yes. I wrote that longhand by candlelight to Fleetwood Mac's Tusk album between the fall of '82 and the spring of '83. You know, my friends started reading it and said, this is pretty good. You should try and get it published. And so I had my sister type it because I didn't know how to type. I was in the college track and they didn't teach us how to type in the '70s. If you were going to college, they taught you how to write in a little blue book. So I sent it out, got some rejection letters, and that just pissed me off. So if you tell me I can't, I'm going to prove you wrong. So I kept working on the book, but my career started taking off. I got married, kids came along. We were doing okay, mid '80s. I was working in finance, but I finished rewriting the book. Someone had encouraged me not to quit and to keep going. I sent it in, and I got the audition to do the second book on the Forgotten Realms, The Crystal Shard. This book was published after I had published The Crystal Shard, and along with two sequels. They're still out there. Del Rey has them. When the editor up there read my book, Echoes of the Fourth Magic, she asked me, all right, really, I like what you're trying to do here. Can we put this in the Forgotten Realms? And I said, what are the Forgotten Realms? There was no, like I said, there was no internet. We didn't know. They hadn't announced it that I had seen. And so she explained the realms to me. And I auditioned for a new book because my book wouldn't fit there.
Now, there's little doubt that most people watching have at least heard of Dungeons & Dragons, and it's certainly been a part of millions of households' gaming traditions for decades now, as demonstrated throughout the arc of Stranger Things and certainly in its most recent two-part season. If you, as one of the preeminent experts on the subject, would kindly give those who haven't been there before a brief tour of this vast world of the Forgotten Realms as you began this pioneering career nearly 40 years ago.
Yeah, it's a shared world. So it's an intellectual property all its own. And it's a giant world that was created by Ed Greenwood and then expanded by all the folks up at TSR and Ed and the authors who were hired to come in. And it's weathered the test of time because, well, it's classic fantasy, but it goes along with Dungeons and Dragons game in terms of the magic system that it involves. And it's been going since the early '80s. But when I came in, it wasn't out yet formally. There were a couple of articles in Dragon magazine, but so it's a classic fantasy world full of varying races and monsters, and demons and magic and dragons, and it's classic medieval. I don't want to say Tolkien-esque because they've expanded it to include a lot of other things. It goes along with Dungeons and Dragons game. It's a fun place to play, fun place to read, fun place to write.
Drizz and D&D took fantasy by storm with this series, and your career launched on its wave. How fantastic did it feel in that spirit to finally see your name on the cover of your first published book?
Well, we were a struggling young family, and the first books paid next to nothing. But I went to Walden's when my book came out, and I saw it on the shelf, and it said "Forgotten Realms" by R.A. Salvatore. Right, it looked like a trademark, and it was surreal. But it didn't change things. My car was still needed some work, and my back was still hurting because I had a back problem at that time. And I still had a young family, and I was still working long hours in finance. And it was 3 years before I quit my job.
Travel back in time, if you would, with viewers to Icewind Dale, the setting you introduced readers to in the first trilogy, along with the serendipitous story behind the now legendary character you created, who became instantly loved by everyone who met him as they read him, the dark elf Drizz Do'Urden, and who became inextricably linked to the D&D literary world with the successful sequels, The Streams of Silver and The Halfling's Gem.
Well, no, the character certainly didn't come first, because when they had asked me to do a book on the audition, they sent me a copy of the first book in the Forgotten Realms. It was the only printed material they had. It was a book called Dark Rock on Moonshade by Doug Niles. The map in that original book just had these tiny little islands, and they were dominated by Doug's characters. So I thought they wanted to do like Dragonlance, where you use the other guy's characters. I didn't really want to do that, but I used one of Doug's characters to introduce the hero of my book, which I was calling the Tyrant of Icewind Dale, Wolfgar. He was introducing Wolfgar. And when I won the audition, Mary Kirchhoff, well, right before, no, I think it was after I won the audition. It might have been before they actually said you were going to do it. Said, no, we don't want you on the Moonshade Isles. Doug's writing a series there. We want you to go out somewhere else. And I'm like, where do you want me to go? In the water? Because the only thing that was there was the island. Then they sent me Ed's original maps of the realms. There's this vast continent. So we spent about 2 weeks resetting the book. And I kept saying like, oh, this looks good. Can I go here? The Bloodstone lands where the big glacier is, because Icewind Dale, right? And she goes, no, you can't go. Don't go there because Doug's doing modules there. We're kind of leaving that for him to develop. Okay, how about if I go here? No, that's Cormier. Ed's working there. This is his world. We're letting him work there. How about here? That's Calimshan. Troy Denning's doing some modules down there, and we're going to kind of let Troy on and on. It took us like 2 weeks before I finally said, all right, top of the map, you get these mountains with a little line above them. Is anybody up there in that little line beyond the mountains? And she goes, I think it's a typo. And I said, no. It's not a typo. Leave it in. That's Icewind Dale. Okay. Okay. So then I was able to go and create it. But it was supposed to be the story of Wolfgar. So I'm in my office, closing up the books and I was a financial analyst, as I said. And the phone rings, and it's Mary one morning, and she says, we got a problem. I have to go to a sales meeting, and you can't use Doug's character, Dareth. And I said, I don't want to use Doug's character. She goes, great, but I've got your outline and your sample chapter, and Dareth's in them, and I need to replace him. We need a sidekick for Wolfgar. And I said, give me a week. I'll come up with something. She says, no, I don't have a week. I looked at the clock, it was almost lunch. I said, okay, I'll go to lunch. Instead of eating lunch for you, Mary, I'll come up with a character. I'll call you this afternoon. And she said, you don't understand. I'm standing across the hall from the conference room. I'm late for a meeting, and I need a sidekick for Wolfgar. And I don't know how it happened. It's nobody I ever played in the game, nobody I'd ever thought of before. But off the top of my head, I said a dark elf. And a long pause, and she says, Drow? And I said, yeah. And now the wheel started spinning. And I said, Drow Ranger. Nobody's ever done that before. She said, Bob, there's probably a reason nobody's done that before. I said, no, this will work. A Drow Ranger. And now I'm starting to think of this Fritz Leiber, Fafford, and Gray Mouser type of scenario, And she says, we're going on and on and on. She says, you know what, since it's a sidekick character, I'm late for a meeting. I'm going to let you get away with it. What's his name? And off the top of my head, I said, Drizz the Warden of Dameron the Shesbanon, the ninth house of Menzoberranzan. She said, why? I said, I don't know. She said, Menzoberranzan? I said, must be a city. She said, what's this other stuff? I said, it's probably the formal name. I don't know. Can you spell it? Not a chance. That's how he was born. So he wasn't supposed to be. He was a sidekick because I needed, off the top of my head, I needed a sidekick for Wolfgar. Kind of a lucky break for me. I wasn't sure I was going to get another shot. My other book was with a different agent who he hadn't sold it. I really liked writing the book, but I didn't think it was going to be a career or anything like that. But I wanted to write another one. So at the end of the Crystal Shad, I threw in a couple of hooks. I had Bruner faking he was dying to get Drizz to agree to go find his home. And I had Regis walking into the town and seeing this assassin with a jeweled dagger and knowing who it was and knowing the guy was after him. So I just threw a couple of hooks in. And then I got the second book. And I did it over the course of a year. And then I had a lot more time to do that book. Then I got the third book. And that one hit the New York Times. And that's when they called me up and said, you might want to quit your day job now. So it's almost like writing found me. It wasn't a plan. I had, by this time I had three little kids that we had to take care of. And my wife and I were trying to build a family, and I was building a career. And it wasn't really until, I would say, as I was writing the Halfling's Gem, that I began to think, maybe this is where I'm going to go instead. And then when the Halfling's Gem came out and did really, really well, plus I had gotten better contract terms on all the books by that point. I had gotten my percentage moved up nicely to where it should have been. And I saw that I actually had a chance, I could make a living doing this. That's when I started telling my boss, no, don't promote me, because there was a big position opening up. And I said, don't put me there. I'll stay right where I am. And I figured I would just keep working for, a few more years at the job I was doing and writing on the side. But then writing just kind of pushed it out.
Wow, talk about having to write under pressure. How quick was Drizzt's character evolution?
It was fast, because the first scene I wrote when I sat down to write the book, which I only had 3.5 months or 2.5 months to write, because they were on a tight deadline, and I was working full time, and I had a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old. My wife was 7 months pregnant, so it was kind of crazy time. But when I first sat down to start writing the book, the actual book, first draft, the first scene I wrote was Drizz running across the tundra when he gets jumped by these Yetis and is saved by Bruno. And I was about 1.5 pages in when I realized this isn't Wolfgar's story, it's his. And he just spoke to me. Everything changed right then and there on the spot. So, but I do this with a lot of my characters. I don't know who they are. I have an archetype in mind, right? But then as I get to know them, they tell me who they are. It's like meeting people for me. I'm a big pantser, not a plotter. And so I got to know them. And the more I got to know them, the more I liked them.
Visually,
I never expected this to happen.
How animated an internal visual process do you have as you're creating?
Kind of, but it wasn't until I saw that cover that Larry Elmore did for the original cover for the Crystal Shard. And that's when it really started to crystallize to me of who he was. Because I don't really see my characters that way. I have a general feeling of what they look like usually. Sometimes I do, because sometimes I know who I'm basing them on. And my newest Demon War series that came out, The Witch Owlin, was based on the Natalie Dormer portrayal of Anne Boleyn in The Tudors with that crooked smile. So I kind of have an idea of who I want them to look like, but I don't really get too wedded to that, because I don't overdo it with the descriptions for a whole bunch of reasons. But so it wasn't until I saw the first drawing of him, which was that Larry Elmore cover, that I really started thinking of it in those terms.
And it must have been quite something to hit the New York Times bestseller list for the first time.
The first book came out, The Crystal Shard came out, and it did really well. It was like number 3 or something on the Walden's book. Compared to the Waldens, they used to have the listing, and there it was. And it did really well. And the second book did better. It was number 1 on the Walden's list and the B. Dalton list. And then, but when this one hit the New York Times, what happened was, like, the orders doubled. Because at that time, if you hit the Times, you would get in like Kmart, Reader's Market. You would get in all the supermarkets and the drugstores. You'd get in all the little areas. All they carried was New York Times bestsellers. And this was still paperback. But that was a big boost, obviously, for me. Not as big a boost as when I got to do a hardcover a few years later, but as far as thinking I could make a living at it, that was really when I realized I could make a living at it. That was kind of cool. My name was on the New York Times list, right? That's kind of cool. And then, honestly, on top of that, it was a job. I had, like I said, we had a young family, and neither Diane nor I came from money. We were working hard. We were just trying to pay our bills and try to give our kids a better life than we had. And so for me, it became it was a job. I loved doing it. It was a job that I actually wanted to do, but I loved working in finance as well. And I was pretty damn good at it. But so I guess when I hit the Times, it was thrilling. Yeah, I mean, it's like, wow, I'm in the New York Times. I never thought that would happen. But the second part of that was, wow, I might be able to make a living at this.
Yahoo News reported that after the success of the Icewind Dale trilogy and the immense popularity of its breakout star, Drizzt, that R.A. Salvatore was inevitably going to explore how one non-evil drow elf in the Forgotten Realm became, well, non-evil. The result was the Dark Elf trilogy, which began with Homeland, with the reviewer adding that it was by far my favorite Dungeons & Dragons novel when I was a kid, and now 30 years later it still is. Looking back yourself, how did that first trilogy unlock the door to then inspire this expansion into Homeland, Exile, and Sojourn?
Well, they had told me when I did the Halfling's Gem that as I was, when I sent the rough draft in, I was putting a hook at the end that they were going to go back and take Mithril Hall. And they told me, no, we think people are tired of these characters. You know, it's time to go do something else. So just tie the whole thing up in the epilogue. And so I did. And then they were like, and if you have other ideas for what you might want to do, let us know, because we'd like to keep working with you. This is going great. And so I sent in the Halfling's Gem, and I just started thinking about what else I might want to do. What other type characters could I come up with? Now at this point, I was just looking for different characters because now I knew the world. When I got the call saying, change of plans, and this is when they told me you might want to quit your day job. We're getting flooded with letters from people that want to know where this dark elf came from. So we want you to do it. We want you to do another trilogy, and we want you to tell his story before he got to Icewind Dale. And so that was really exciting for a bunch of reasons. Now I had that was my first contract for more than one book. Right around that time as well, I also sold Echoes of the Fourth Magic with an option to do two more to Rock Publishers, ROC, out of Penguin now. So I looked at all my materials. I had a little bit on Dark Elves from the old modules. There was an entry in, it was either Fiend Folio or Deities and Demigods or Unearthed Arcana. One of those books had an entry, like a one-page entry on Drow. And so I said, well, what else you got? And they said, nothing, that's it. And I said, well, what are you saying to me? They said, we're giving you carte blanche to create the Drow in the Forgotten Realms. And so, we had the Matriarchal Society, the Spider Queen, everyone thinks they're evil. That was all there. So what I did is I actually based Menzo Berenzano on Mario Puzo's The Godfather, the Five Families of New York. And that's how I did the structure, because I wanted something that someone could look at from the outside and think, that's just evil. But it's not, because just evil is boring and it's unsustainable. They have their codes, they have their ways, you just follow the codes. You don't, looking at it from the outside, you don't understand that. So you just kind of say, oh, that's just evil. But if it was, how do people survive? And so I came up with Homeland, which was to this day, is probably one of my favorite books that I've ever done. And, that's what really started the run. We did those 3 books, and all 3 of them did very, very well. And the other books were still selling very, very well. And then I started the Cleric Quintet, and I had barely gotten going in it when they came to me and said, okay, I got good news and bad news. The good news is we want you to stop the Cleric Quintet. And I'm like, that's not good news. And they said, no. We want you to stop it, and we want you to, Walden Books wants our hardcover. It's going to be our first hardcover. And they want you, and they want Dark Elves. So go back to that. And so I'm like, wow, that's a big deal, because it's a higher price point. That's how you make a living. Paperback writer is a lot less lucrative than actually getting a hardcover out there. And a lot less, you get a lot more eyes on your work when it comes out in hardcover as well. So I said, well, what could possibly be the bad news? And she said, I need it in 6 weeks. So I had 6 weeks to come up with a plot line and write the legacy. But it was
Wh-
fun. I had a good time.
The numbers that Legacy of the Drow did were staggering, beginning with it being D&D's first hardcover novel and hitting #1 on the New York Times bestseller list within 3 weeks of hitting store shelves, while Starless Night debuted at #12 and Siege of Darkness and Passage to Dawn both debuted back-to-back in the top 20 on the list. Before all that, how excited were you to be back inhabiting Drizzt & Co., exploring all the new territory that fans of the series eventually would be?
Well, I was back writing with I was writing with the Drow now, all of them. So I was able to really get into some. I knew who the bad guys were in this quartet of books. I knew that, and I knew who the good guys were. So my characters, my heroes were already very well established to me. So I didn't have to create a whole bunch of new heroes to go along with them. I could focus on the bad guys who are coming to get Drizzt and all the stuff that happened from them. That was the first book. And then the second book was really, I think, when I very much started to get into Drizzt's head and heart. And when he realized, if I'm here, I'm putting them at risk. I'm just going to go surrender. I'm going to sacrifice myself for my friends. And when his friends, particularly Caddy Bree, found out about it, she's like, oh, no, you're not. And she went down there to find him. And I got to see Artemis and Triri in a new light. Jarl Axel got introduced. Everything just started coming together with new threads and new connections between the Drow and the surface, between the good guys and the supposedly bad guys. And as I got to know the characters better, so I was having the time of my life. And I got the first couple of books done, and I was almost done the third book. And it was time for a new contract. And I had this huge falling out with the editor at TSR. And I was like, done. And so I finished the third book, the editor on it, and I had to write the fourth book. And I wrote the fourth book, and that was it. I was done. And then I was unemployed. And that's when Del Rey called me. Owen Locke over at Del Rey called me and said, hey, I want you to come work for us. And he offered me a really nice deal to come in and gave me the time I needed. It was much less time pressure because he wanted me to build a world. And that's when I built Demon Wars.
Did you have as much of a blast writing the Cleric Quintet, which of course consisted of Canticle and Sylvan Shadow's Night Masks, the Fallen Fortress, and the Chaos Curse, as fans did reading it?
I had already done a couple of the books, and that was done long before I finished the Legacy of the Drow. I did the Legacy, then I went back and finished the Cleric, at least books 3 and 4. Then I did Starless Night, and then I finished the 5th. They were interwoven. In fact, that was the fight. The fight was when it came time for the new contract, both of my series were done, or were going to be done. And they wanted me to do, I just went there and I said, okay, let's do 3 more Drizzt books, same contract deals. I didn't need any increase in anything. It was mutually beneficial. We were all doing great. But they wanted me to replace the Cleric Quintet with paperbacks as well. But the same editor had just hired me over at Warner Books to do my Crimson Shadow trilogy. It was Warner Books then. It's Hachette now. And I was like, well, you're asking me to do 3 books a year for the next 3 years. I'm tired now. That initial burst was over, because by this point I had done what? Not counting, I had done Echoes of the Fourth Magic, The Witch's Daughter. I had done the Spear Wielders trilogy, so that's 5 outside of TSR. And I had done 10 Drizzt books and the Cleric book. So I had done 20 books between 1987, and this was, I think, 1994 or 3. I had done 20 books in 4 different series. And I was like, I just don't have it in me to keep doing 3 a year. And, I have to do those 3 books for Warner. So I'll give you 3 Drizzt books. No. You got to do them all. It's above. And he got mad and well, if you don't do this, I'm going to get someone else to write Drizzt. And it just got really, really, really ugly. And then I made it worse, because on a Friday night I said, fine, I'll do it. And I didn't sleep all weekend because I knew I couldn't do it. And it was actually the point where he was saying, just give me the ideas. I'll get someone else to write it and we'll put your name on it. And I'm like, no, we're not doing that. So I just finally said, okay, I'll do it. And then on Monday, I was like, my wife looked at me. She said, "What's the matter with you?" I said, I can't do this. There's no way I can do 9 books in the next 3 years, 3 different series. I don't have that creative energy in me at this point. I just burned myself through. That candle's low. She said, "Then don't do it." And I said, "Well, then we only got the Warner books and they don't pay a lot compared to these. These are the books that are hitting the New York Times every time." And we had just bought a new home. And she says, "We'll sell. If we have to sell the house, we'll sell the house and downsize. Don't do it." And so I called him back Monday morning, first thing, and I said, "I can't do this. I'm not signing that contract." And he was bullshit at me because he had told everyone I had signed. So that was my fault. I shouldn't have said yes until I was sure.
Something else very significant came out of that disagreement that had pretty serious implications for the character and series, if you'd be willing to share.
It got really ugly. And he said, "I'm going to get someone else to write Drizz." I said, "There's nothing I can do to stop you. But if you do it, understand that if somebody else features Drizz in a book, I'll never write the character again." And he did. He got someone else to write a Drizz book, but it never came out. But that's a whole different story. But it was ugly. That was really ugly.
It sounds like it. That's nothing to be.
And I was scared because, when we had started making some pretty good money and we had bought a new house and new cars. And suddenly it's like, we're going to shut you out. But then Del Rey called and I got to do Demon Wars.
Demon Wars was recently released for the first time in graphic audio, which Audiophile magazine celebrated as high fantasy at its best, which the folks at Graphic Audio show they are adept at delivering, especially battle scenes, which have lots of dialogue and sound effects. Through the course of the Demon Trilogy, which features the Demon Awakens, the Demon Spirit, and the Demon Apostle, is one of the best world builders out there. Please take viewers back inside the creation of Corona.
I had for a long time had this idea of doing a series based on where magic was based on gemstones. That's not an idea that's unique to me. I mean, you have all kinds of crystal shops that say they're magical, right? If you look through the entirety of human history, you will find people associating certain gems with certain properties, whether it's graphite and lightning or whether they had, what I mean? That's a common thing. But I had this idea for a series, and I had read Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose. I'm a Catholic kid I was a Catholic kid growing up in Massachusetts. And so that fascinated me about the fight in the church over money between the Franciscans and the Benedictines. And I had this idea of this society I could build around these gemstones in a church, and a fight in the church about how to use the gemstones. And this whole world started coming, and I really wanted to explore it. But I didn't have the time. That was supposed to be the Crimson Shadow books. But I just didn't have time to build the world out, so I stayed away from it. Stayed away from those core ideas because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it right because I didn't have time. I was writing 3 books a year, or 2 books a year, whatever. And now I had the time to do it. And so I sat down and I did the Demon Awakens, and I created this huge world. And then I found a couple of characters to fall in love with, and I fell in love with them, and they showed me the world. And it's a 7-book series, and I'm proud of it. It's one of my favorite works.
That very important 4th book you mentioned in the series, Mortalis, was one that Publishers Weekly promised contains enough adventure, including finally a magical battle against a tigerish monster, to keep it moving at a happy pace, and is considered a bridge novel between the first and the second trilogies in the Demon Wars saga, which then continues with Ascendance, Transcendence, and Immortal. Please reveal for fans why it's significant within the series and your broader career.
I was writing it while I was watching my brother die of cancer. It was cathartic. It saved my brain. It saved my life, I think. And the book is about a plague. It's about grief. It's about dealing with it. I've gotten some of the most heartwarming letters ever from people who have gone through loss and said, "Thank you for this." And I remember when I turned it into my editor, it was Veronica Chapman over at Del Rey. And I knew, and I said to her when I gave her the book, "Look, you're either going to really love this or you're going to think it's incredibly self-indulgent." Because I didn't know. I hadn't even gone back and reread it. I couldn't. And she called me up and she was crying, and I didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. but you could tell she was like having trouble. She said, don't change a word. Don't change a word of this book. Don't change a word of this book. So I knew I was just in a different zone when I wrote it. Place I go to sometimes, but I couldn't come out of it. The fourth book in that series, I mean, is probably my favorite book I've ever written, a book called Mortalis. And then when I finished that series, by then, Wizards of the Coast had bought TSR. They got me back. But I kept going with Demon Wars. I did a book called a standalone book that I actually had self-published or kind of partner published with a guy who used to run Del Rey, and then he bought a warehouse and he was like distributing, and so we kind of worked together. I did a book called The Highwayman, which is another story I wanted to explore. Then a couple of years later, I sold that book and 3 sequels called the Saga of the First King to Tor books. So now there's 11 Demon Wars books. And then I kickstarted an RPG game that my son, who's a high-level game designer, working for one of the biggest companies in the world and one of the biggest games in the world, kind of running it at this point. And my other son, who was a narrative designer at 38 Studios, the 3 of us did a game, an RPG, and we kickstarted it. It was very successful in Demon Wars. And then I went back again and did 3 new books called The Coven, which I talked about earlier with Owlin, the witch. And now I did those with Tor books as well. And now I'm starting a new Demon Wars series, kind of a follow-up to The Coven with another publisher, with Saga. Yeah, so it's 14 Demon Wars books.
Touching on some of those other spin-offs within the series in the context of your advice for world building, whether say a trilogy with the Saga of the First King, featuring the Highwaymen, the Ancient, the Dame and the Bear, or the Coven with the Child of a Mad God, Reckoning of Fallen Gods, and Song of a Risen God, or any others you care to draw from, what are some of the basic building blocks, so to speak, that must be there foundationally for the rest of that realm to come to life?
Start with the world. When you're writing fantasy, you are asking the reader to suspend disbelief. You're saying there are dragons, there's magic, there are elves, there are demons, or whatever fantastical, otherworldly, supernatural, preternatural, other natural, unnatural creatures you're putting in. You're asking the reader to suspend your disbelief and pretend they're dragons. Because you're doing that, everything else you build about the world, the more that world can seem familiar, whether you're writing about dark elves and Menzoberranzan or, Alpinadorans and Demon Wars, the more that can sound familiar to people and make sense, because history rhymes, the better off you're going to be. The more you'll engage them into your world, so they'll believe in your fantastical elements, if you will. So the Demon Wars world, when I started, again, the main conceit of the world of the gemstone magic system. But then I'm thinking, well, how do they get the gemstone? Are they operating gemstone mines? But wait a minute, wouldn't there just be so many of them that it would just flood the world, right? But no, because the gemstones, I had to come up with a way for them to collect the gemstones and then make sure that only a certain number of them retained their magical abilities or had magical abilities. In this case, it's retained. And then it had to be something that somebody knew, a way to get them that everybody else couldn't get them, or it wouldn't work. So when I started with the original books, the world is called Corona because it has a ring about it. And the monks, hundreds of years before, someone had figured out by accident that when every like 7 generations, they have meteor showers, like we have the Perseid meteor showers, whatever, but something happens in the orbit of the planet. I never got into that, but there was some, whether it was proximity to another planet or whatever, but some of those gemstones would fall. And it happens in the same area of the world, and it's in the ocean, but there's an island that has these rain showers of gemstones and minerals. And they found this island, and they're magical, but they didn't stay magical. But somebody figured out how to treat them early on to keep them magical. And that was Saint Abel, the Abelican Church. He was the first one who figured out this We get these gemstones. If we do this to them, they don't seem to lose their magical value. They stay strong. So now suddenly we have somebody, and they build a church around him, his followers. They've got magic. Nobody else has magic that they know of. The demons do, but they don't want the demons around. If the demons don't show up, they're as much folklore as reality. It's just a functioning medieval society. And suddenly this guy comes along, and you got run over by your ox when he was pulling the plow. Oh, you broke your leg. Here, let me fix that for you. Well, what kind of an impact would that have? If he uses his little healing stone on you, and he fixes your leg. So that's how the church came to be. But now you have it, and the church knows how to get to the island where you can collect these stones. They know how to do it. And they know how to keep them magical. And every 7 generations, they're going to send somebody out to get it. But nobody else knows how to keep them magical in this part of the world. So now I've created the power, the church, working with the king and then the landowners. And the way the church mollifies them is, you know what? If I put this gemstone in the pommel of your sword, it's going to be better than the other guy's sword. That type of thing. If I give you this in your armor and you get hurt, you can just call upon, we'll show you how to use this stone to heal yourself in the middle of your fight. So it becomes this power struggle and the stratification of the society. And now we're about 800 years in when I did my Demon Wars series. It's 800 years past the beginning of that church. And now corruption's all over the place, like the schism in the Catholic Church. So history's rhyming for people in Demon Wars. So now what do I need? Well, I need a monk who's going to look at the corruption within the church and say no, who's going to stop basically the Franciscan movement in the church, where you shouldn't be holding on to these gemstones. You should be teaching a farmer out in the little way out in the wilderness that's providing food to the land. If somebody in the area, if one of that little cluster of houses, somebody gets hurt, he can heal them. Or if a disease comes in, he can cure it. You shouldn't be hoarding them. So I need him. And I need a couple of heroes because the bad stuff's going to happen. The first book is called The Demon Awakens. One of these legendary demons comes up. And then the whole world kind of built from that. So I came up with Brother Evelyn and Elbrian and Gilseppine, Pony, who's probably the strongest character in that series in terms of being front and center, like the moral gravity of the whole series. And I planned a 6-book series, but it really became a 7-book series because the first one was going to be just a trilogy of that event of the Demon War and the breaking of the church or the transformation of the church. And then the second one was going to be like what came after the transformation, because it's not going to be easy sailing. You're messing with powers that be. But then I realized I needed a bridge book, and that became Mortalis, which, like I told you, was my favorite book I've ever done. So, and then of course, as the world expands, we go back to the Highwayman series, was the second one. That takes place 800 years previous to these books. But the founding of the church is kind of in the background, and the unification of the lands under a single king in this area called Haunts. And the Highwayman's really about a character. It's more like a Drizz book in that it's more about a very personal story, even though there's a bigger event going on around it. Then when I went back and did the Coven, which takes place near the end of the original series and kind of dovetails with it, these aren't the only magic gemstones. There's a mountain that has a cave full of crystals that resonate magic, and the witches of this one tribe know how to access that magic and make their warriors better than the other warriors. And so I created that and that opened up the west coast of the world with a whole other empire, because again, a demon war and that opened up prophecies in the west and they'll sweep across the land. And now the new series is about the remnants of that series. So it just keeps building and history keeps rhyming. And I'm at the point where it rhymes with pirates. The latest Demon Wars series is after the end result, where everything looked like it was in a peaceful but tentative situation. Of course, peace doesn't hold. There'd be nothing to write about in this series. But you have a situation where some conquerors now are exploiting the conquered because of a certain treasure that they want. And they need the ocean. They need their ships to get there. So this next series, a continuation of the Coven, is out at the coast, and it involves pirates, and it's kind of almost like an arms race at sea. We don't know yet. It's going to be Demon Wars Buccaneers, but we haven't even titled the first book's done. What happened is I wrote the book, and I didn't like it because I was going back and forth between what was going on in this place inland and the pirates, and this character from the previous series and the new characters. And I was going back and forth, and something wasn't working. And then I realized I got to break this up. So I pulled all the chapters for the inland story and put them aside for book 2. And I focused just on doing the pirate stories and developing those characters on this pirate ship that I'm building. And I had an absolute giggling blast doing it. I walk downstairs every day laughing, and my wife would be like, "I had a good day?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, these guys are fun." And it's just crazy. And I got to do all kinds of like exploration about shipbuilding and ships and the nautical terms and the way the ships work and what a pirate sloops really look like and the weaponry. And this is pre-gunpowder, so there's magic, but there's also some pretty clever weapons put on these ships.
What's your secret to creating magic on the page?
Well, one thing you got to do whenever you're creating a magic system, if you're talking about that, the meta view, is you have to know the boundaries. The reader has to know the boundaries. Otherwise, it's Deus Ex Machina, right? You build it up, you build it up, you build it up. It goes, I learned a new spell, dragon die. The dragon dies. Who cares, right? So you have to know the boundaries. That's why I always had a problem with the gods in the Forgotten Realms. Because if they're gods, then why are we, right? They can just fix whatever they want to fix, right? So they're not really gods. They're supernatural or super powerful beings who are toying with the mortals of the world, if you will, in my opinion. It's been a running discussion between me and Ed Greenwood and Jim Lowther and a few other people. But yeah, so you have to the magic system has to make sense. It has to have some themes running through it. Like in the Forgotten Realms, it's arcane power which is elemental based, and divine power, which is given from the superior beings. In Demon Wars, it's the gemstones. And the demon magic is different, but they don't know. They have no access to that. The only one that has access to that are the people who get corrupted by the demon. But the boundaries are known to the reader. So the reader understands things that, Giuseppe or Evelyn or Owlin can and cannot do. And there has to be limitations on it. If you go walk down the street throwing lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning bolt, lightning, who can fight you? So there has to be limitations. There has to be spell exhaustion, if you will. There has to be difficulty to access it. There has to be something to limit it, to keep the characters human.
Kryptonite, it sounds like, basically.
Kryptonite, yeah. Pervasive kryptonite. That's always going to prevent someone from just going. You can always have your characters hit that zone like Drizz does in the books, where they hit that fighting zone. He becomes the hunter and just becomes unstoppable for that short amount of time. You can always have that kind of, extra level for heroes. That's what heroes have. They have that clutch gene, the old cliche for sports, right? But there has to be limitations, and it can't be all accessible all the time. And the reader has to understand it. That's the most important. And that, again, it'll make sense. You can suspend disbelief to this point. That's all we're asking.
So the publisher gets acquired and you don't have to wind up following through on your threat, ultimately actually resulting in a return to the world of the Forgotten Realms. First with the Paths of Darkness series, featuring the Silent Blade, the Spine of the World, and Sea of Worlds. What was that character creator reunion like between you and Drizzt after so much time away on the page?
Paths of Darkness was the first series when I went to Wizards. What happened was, first of all, I've been incredibly fortunate. I've worked with, I don't, the only time I ever had a problem with an editor, and it wasn't even about the editing, it was more of an ethical, I think, fight that I had, was that time. That's the only time I've had a problem with an editor. I've had amazing editors. I think most editors who are working for houses, they don't get there by accident. Yeah. I've been very fortunate with that. But going back, what happened was Wizards of the Coast, with Magic the Gathering's success, TSR had gone bankrupt, essentially. They owed me a lot of money. They owed a lot of people a lot of money. And it was those of us who quit, or even the ones who were still there, weren't really surprised. It was the same kind of decisions that pushed me out of the company. Get someone else to, just give me the ideas, I'll get someone else to write the books. That won't work. That's a short-term sugar high. You can't do that. It doesn't work. You're killing your own golden goose there, pal. You know, the goose might taste good, but no more eggs, right? So we weren't surprised when it went bankrupt. And I had a pretty massive lawsuit going against them for the money they owed me. And then Peter Atkinson bought, Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, and Peter called me up. I was actually in, he called me up here, and I was on my way. I was heading out to San Francisco for a library conference. And he said, Bob, I got your check in hand. I want to mail it to you. Drop the lawsuit. And my lawyers wouldn't let me. They were like, oh, no, we can't do that. We filed these motions. I'm like, oh, no, drop the lawsuit now. No, we can't. I said, look, you have a court date? Yeah, I'm not paying you. Don't go. If we don't go, they'll dismiss the case. Thank you. So the case got dismissed. Peter paid me. Everything was great. He's a wonderful, I can't say enough good things about Peter Atkinson. He is just a decent human being. Like, one of the first things he did when he walked upstairs in the attic at TSR's building, he saw all this beautiful art, and he says, what's all this? He goes, oh, that's all the covers and everything that all these artists did for us when they were working here, for Dragon Magazine. And he's like, well, why do we have them? Give them back to the artists so they can make prints and make a living. He's that kind of person. He's just a good guy. He's a good human being. And he called me up and he's like, Bob, I really want you back. We've got Margaret and Tracy back to do Dragonlance, and we think that makes Dragonlance happy. We've got Ed Greenwood back, and we want you back because we think Forgotten Realms with you and Ed will make people happy. And I said, well, you want me back, but I'm working with Del Rey. It's an exclusive deal. And I'm not going to go try to break the deal because you want me back to do Drizz. He goes, of course. I said, I'm not doing it. And it's no hard feelings. I knew the deal when I signed the contract, but I had made a vow that somebody else does a Drizz book. I'm not doing it. And you want me back, and you want me to work with so-and-so, the editor, because he's the head editor. Well, yeah, you'd have to work with him. He's our main editor, and you'd be our big gun, coming in. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to work with him again. He doesn't want to work with me, and I don't want to work with him. Neither of us like each other or trust each other. I'm not blaming him. It's probably half my fault. I don't care. I'm not working with him. He doesn't want to work with me. So I wish you all the best. Thanks for paying me. Hope you read my Demon Wars books. But then a whole bunch of things happened. There were some other issues that I won't go into because I wasn't there. But that editor wound up getting fired. Mary Kirchhoff came back. They looked at the mail they were getting with the announcement of the other Drizz book. And it was all, how dare you let someone else write this character? What are you doing? Why is Bob not writing these books? And they canceled the book. And that's when I was at the conference in San Francisco, and I got a phone call and said, Bob, call me back. There was a message on the machine when I got back to the hotel. Bob, it's Peter Atkinson. Please call me right back. So-and-so is out. Mary Kirchhoff is now running the book line again. We want you back. And this other book has been mulched. It will never come out. So I called Del Rey, and Del Rey said, no, we're okay with you doing Drizz books. That built you. A new editor, Phil Athens, and Phil became my editor. We're still dear friends. He edited me for probably 12 years, 14 years, a lot of years. And he's probably edited more of my books than any other person on the planet. And I just adore him. He's a wonderful guy. He has, by the way, for beginning writers, Athens and Associates. He does consulting, helping writers bring their dream to fruition. But he's a wonderful guy. And I got to get back to these characters, and I'd never forgotten them. I mean, it's not like they were gone, but I had to come up with, what do I want to do?
It sounds like that new breeze of creative freedom really allowed you to expand the potential of these worlds into their full realized possibility, especially, say, with the Sellsword series, featuring Servants of the Shard, Promise of the Witch King and the Road to the Patriarch, and the Hunter's Blade trilogy, with the Thousand Orcs, the Lone Drow, and the Two Swords.
And what I realized is I wanted to write stories about all the other characters, not just Drizz. And so I did like Servant of the Shard, I think was the first book I did for them, which was Jarl Axel and Entreri, more than anyone else. And then I really started falling in love with Jarl Axel and Entreri. So I wound up doing the Sellswords trilogy with them. So they really let me branch out. They gave me a lot of freedom. It was Mary. She trusted me. We've been dear friends ever since she called me that January in 1987 day, or March 87, I guess, when she called me. We've been friends since then. We're about the same age. She's brilliant. She was my first editor. And she just helped me get back on track with the Drizz books. So we went through several iterations. We had all these other stories like Sellswords, Paths of Darkness, Sellswords, Hunter's Blades, and then is when they were going to do 4th edition, and that became Transitions.
Now, for fans of the series, there was a big change that corporate made that you had to adjust to in your writing of the Transitions series. Would you discuss a bit about how you did so? Within the span of the Orc King, the Pirate King, and the Ghost King.
Orc King and Ghost King. And that was another bitter time because they were advancing the world 100 years and we didn't want them to. I didn't want them to. Ed didn't want them to, but they were doing it. And too bad, we're doing it. And so I had to write that series. But when I was writing that series, I was very aware of the fact that in a very few years, in a very short few years, they were going to come back to me and Ed and say, we got to fix this. And so Ed and I were plotting on how we would bring back characters that had to go missing in the 100-year bump of the world.
Forbes magazine would later point out regarding this 100-year leap that the decision may have been abrupt and jarring for all the authors of the Forgotten Realms, but it pushed Salvatore in a new direction that he wouldn't have otherwise taken. Please elaborate a bit on how you lined that leap up within the story you wanted to tell in the Neverwinter saga, throughout Gauntlegrim, Neverwinter, Sharon's Claw and the Last Threshold, and then the Companion's Codex, with Night of the Hunter, Vengeance of the King, and the Rise of the Iron Dwarf.
Now I've got this period when they're still onto the new realms, and the only one still around is Drizz and Brunner, who's very old. And Brunner, then Gauntlegrim happens, and now it's just Drizz, and I need new people around Drizz. And so now I got to explore the other side. Drizz fell in with a bad crowd, if you would. People that would more be associated with Entreri and Jarl Axel than with Catti-brie and Brunner. And so I was running with that through the Neverwinter series. And that was very interesting to me because it was Drizz still trying to be true to himself and staying true to himself for the most part, but this profound sense of loss he had to go through. All his friends were gone. He's with this new people who are very different. And then sure as heck, I was at Gen Con and it came Bob, we need help. We got to fix this. And I'm like, sit down. Ed and I have talked about this for 5 years. By then it was like 6 years. And then I got to write the Companions, which is, again, one of my favorite. Because the Companions, I did something that you're not supposed to do in literature. I brought main characters back from the dead, more than one. And that gets rid of tension if you're not careful. So I had to make it clear that this was kind of a unique situation for these folks. And now I've got 3 characters coming back to be reborn with full consciousness. And I got to live that. If I only knew then what I know now, fantasy that everybody has. Oh man, if I could go back to high school now, I'd own the place, right? Everybody has that feeling. But I got to do it with 3 characters for 3 different reasons. So I had the halfling, who was always the tag along in the party, always being protected by his friends, determined that this time around, because they were going back to help Drizz, the new Drizz was in trouble. This time around, he's coming back, and he's not going to, they're not going to have to worry about him. So even in the crib, he's trying to work his fingers on the buttons to try and develop dexterity to become the best halfling ever. And from the time he can walk, he's climbing walls. He's developing the skills that he's going to need to be not just an okay thief, but like the best. And I have Caddy Bree, who's going back, and it's just to finish her life because she's married to Drizz when she leaves. She's going back to finish what she had started, to see him through his hero's journey and to complete her own hero's journey. So she's very excited about going back. And then Brunner, who's saying, I spent my whole life. I defended my people in Icewind Dale. I traveled to the 4 corners of the world. I found the old homeland. I regained it for Clan Battlehammer. I rebuilt Mithril Hall. I found Gauntlgrim. That I've done everything that I'm supposed to do. I did it. My life was full of glory. I'm supposed to be my just reward, because with the dwarves, it's almost like a Norse thing. I'm supposed to be sitting at Thorin's table, okay, and enjoying my well-earned afterlife. And you bring me back, and he had to go because of his loyalty to his friends. And you bring me back, and it makes a mockery of that entire life that I lived. So Brunner's kind of answering the reader's doubts, right, about you can't do this through the whole book. And that was fun. And then when Wolfgar winds up back later on, Wolfgar had lived to be 105 years old. I told his ending in a story called To Legend He Goes. He had kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, and great-great-grandkids. He had lived everything that society tells you you're supposed to do. 105 years old, and he's gone. Now he's dead. So he wasn't even going to come back. But now when he does, he's just there to have fun. He's just a hedonist at this point.
Kids who are crazy about D&D loved reading these books. Back home, even kids I knew in high school would read your books behind their textbook in class.
I was happy to give it to him. Tolkien gave me that when I was in college.
Screen Rant recently pointed out that because your books have become so inextricably linked for fans to the game world, that Dungeons & Dragons 5e uses the Forgotten Realms campaign setting as a default location for games, both thanks to its popularity and lore. There have been many D&D novels released over the years, and they have been set across many different campaign settings. But the most popular by far is the Legend of Drizzt series by R.A. Salvatore. Building on that success with a new generation of readers with the Legends of Drizzt, please take us on a tour of where your imagination led you next, within the wildly entertaining Homecoming trilogy with Archmage, Maestro, and Hero, and then within the Generations trilogy that co-starred Timeless, Boundless, and Relentless.
Really, I thought the end of the Drizzt, because Wizards wasn't going to do any more books. So I thought Hero was the last Drizzt book. And so I really brought it almost full circle between Drizzt and Loth. The Homecoming series gets Drizzt back into Menzoberranzan, changes his relationship with House Banry, the main house there. He becomes their instrument of destruction against Demogorgon, this demon lord that's attacking the city. And at the end, he has a face-off with Loth and talks her. She offers him everything he could ever want. And he said, if he'll just bend the knee. And he tells her to F off, essentially. That was his triumph. And I thought that's it. It's a good ending for Drizzt. But there was still a couple of things that I hadn't been able to do because I ran out of time. One of them was tell the story of Zaknafein and Jarlaxle before Drizzt was born, to expand Menzoberranzan through the eyes of other people who hated Loth, and to find out that Drizzt wasn't unique. Drizz was only unique. He wasn't unique in that he didn't want to partake of the evil ways of that society. He was unique in that he not only, and he wasn't even unique in leaving. He was unique in that he left and thrived. He didn't get killed in the Underdark like you would expect. Somehow he managed to survive and thrive. And so he became kind of the hero, if you will, to the Drow who didn't want to live under this dictatorial tyrant demon queen. Because the whole thing about Menzo Berenzan is they have an autocratic, all-powerful dictator, and the only people who get anywhere are the ones that are zealots of her. And, you know, we see that in our own world. Again, history rhymes. But this is different because it's not just her and then her son and then her grandson and then the great-granddaughter, and eventually it'll fizzle out because you get a complete incompetent who's just going to go too far. It's her eternally. They can't escape. And they're in a hole in the ground. The only information that gets in is the information she lets get in. So I wanted to expand that, and that was Generations. Allowed me to do a lot of things. And I got to really tie up the redemption arc of Artemis and Trary. I got to, you know, have Drizz and Caddy Bree get there, fulfill Caddy Bree's coming back and what that was all about.
Kirkus Reviews would next promise readers that longtime fans of Drizzt will surely enjoy the novel's breakneck pacing, non-stop action, cast of familiar and beloved characters, and deep philosophical exploration throughout. This storyline in particular packs a thematic wallop that is both timely and timeless. Readers should embrace Salvatore's newest adventure with Drizzt and Company in the Way of the Drow trilogy, one of the most recent hit trilogies in the series. Please talk about what stayed exciting over so many decades. Writing Starlight Enclave, Glacier's Edge, and the Tao of Drizzt.
We go to The Way of the Drow. And The Way of the Drow, the first book, Starlight Enclave, I had planned that book more than a decade ago. I didn't know the particulars of it. But at some point, I wanted to show a Drow society that hadn't been caught in the web of Loth. And that was Starlight Enclave. Glacier's Edge is the second book in The Way of the Drow, following up Starlight Enclave. Starlight Enclave takes place in a different part of the realms, and it ends on a cliffhanger. Glacier's Edge, even though it's a trilogy, I really wrote that as the Glacier's Edge really is Glacier's Edge and Starlight Enclave are one story. This got to resolve all of the issues from Starlight Enclave to do with the heroes. But the overriding issue that's been winding its way through is that, and this happened in the last book in the Generations trilogy, there's a civil war brewing in Menzo Berenzan, where some really powerful priestesses did this massive heresy against Loth. And they've got an army. And there's a big fight coming. And so you see through this new series, Drizzt dealing with, I'm going to have to go down there and join and fight. And, you know, the other characters having to go through not the other Drow characters in my book having to resolve, am I going down there to fight or am I staying the hell out of it? And then saying, I was with you all along to whoever wins, right? And that's the third book that I'm working on now. Loth's Warrior books. And starting with the second series, I went back and did it and added it in the first series. I was going to write that first person because I love Roger Zelazny's Amber work. But first person wouldn't work for me because of the way I like to get into the minds of everybody and the battle scenes where I want to show all the different fights going on. So the compromise, I started every section of the book. The books usually have 3, 4, or 5 sections, usually 4. But I start each section of the book with a little essay by Drizzt, just musing about the world. And they became really popular with people. And people kept asking me, can you put them all together in a collection? And we finally did. And it's called The Tao of Drizzt. And it just came out. It's a beautiful leather-bound, beautiful, beautiful $40 book. And that's out now. And that's, I think, I mean, the sales have been really great on it because I think people wanted that. It wasn't just the people writing it. A lot of people wanted that. They wanted to have all the essays together in one place. But beyond that, when you write a series that's 35 years and 39 books, which is where we're at next year, a lot of people will read and then fall off, maybe come back to it, get a little further, fall off, or get here and just fall. Life changes. People, So this is something that I think even the people who aren't reading the newer Drizz books yet, or haven't caught up, would want. Because there's no spoilers, it's just the essays.
Any chance fans can get a sneak preview? Is there a new Drizzt novel coming, or something outside the Forgotten Realms?
Demon Wars trilogy. I get to do very different battle scenes. That's a big part of it. In fact, I tried it out a little bit when I did a novella for Audible called One-Eyed Jacks that has a little pirate fight in it. But they're fighting for a good cause, but they're not all necessarily good people. So in a way, it's kind of like Drizzt against the Drow. Only the Drow are not in this series. The Drow are the people that you thought you would be rooting for, but they're really doing bad things.
After all these years of mastering the art, what can you share with fans from your own canvas for aspiring novelists struggling to figure out how to bring a battle scene into full color, so to speak, on the page?
Well, if you're writing a larger scale battle, you better know history. You better learn tactics. You have to learn what would work and what wouldn't. Go out and play paintball on a field and find out how bad it really feels to get flanked, right? Or to know that you're surrounded. What does that feel like? Now, you're not going to get the same feeling, obviously, when they're shooting paintballs at you as if they're going to kill you. But you've got to learn that kind of stuff. You've got to study some of the battles of history. What kind of maneuvers would a ship make to take out another ship? What's a bow rake, right? What's a rake? What kind of sailing would you do? You need to know those kind of details, and they have to sound true enough, even though you're adding fantastical elements that will change them, and then change them logically. So for the big ones, you just have to understand tactics a little bit. So read about the Second World War, read about the Civil War, read about the Revolutionary War, read about the 100 Years' War, the battles, read about Napoleon, the fights with Napoleon's armies. And even though those had cannon and guns, you'll understand the tactics that they use. Read about the Vikings, watch the shows, watch Vikings. What's a shield wall? Why does it work? And then for the individual battles, I'm a sports lover. I played hockey all my life. I played basketball. I still play softball, even though I'm in my 60s. I weightlift. I boxed in high school. I pay attention. I love watching sports because I love watching the physical genius of these people. So I before I'll write a Drizzt book or a Drizzt battle scene, I'll go pull up the Olympic performance from 1980 or 84. I always mix it up, of Torval and Dean dancing the bolero, ice dancing. That's poetry. That's art. That is a dance. So is a sword fight. When I did Demon Wars, the elves who were little couldn't compete, except that they had really good metal, so they could make fine blades that could get through the seams of the armor of the bigger enemies. So what did they do? Well, they were fencing. Their elven sword dance, Benel de Sada, is fencing. So I signed my kids up for fencing lessons. And while they were on the mat beating the crap out of each other, I was interviewing their instructor. And I learned about fencing. But you got to watch it. You got to see it. You got to visualize it if you want to write it. And I always tell people, pay attention to where someone's feet are. You don't throw a punch with your hand. You throw it with your balance. How do the hips turn when you're hitting someone or swinging a sword? And when you know all those things, you can choreograph a fight scene that makes sense. Because you watch. For me, I watch it in my head. I watch it happening, and I'm typing it. It's kind of fun too.
Now, you'd get a once in any author's lifetime call to contribute to the Star Wars literary galaxy with Vector Prime, the kickoff book of the new Jedi Order series. That must have been a fun gig to land after coming of age watching those original 3 classic films.
Oh, it was a shocking call again. I was working for Del Rey. This was when I had gone over to Del Rey. And with the new movies coming up, coincidentally, the licenses were expiring for things like the adult book line. Wonder why that happened. So you had Bantam Doubleday Del and Del Rey fighting over the rights to do the new adult Star Wars fiction. And Del Rey won that fight. And then, just as an aside, after they had jacked the price way up fighting over, like 2 weeks later, Bertelsmann bought Random House. So Del Rey and Doubleday were like on one floor apart in the same building after that, right? And now it's like one publisher, really, but one group. But anyway, I was working for them, and they came up with this idea to do this 20-something book series called The New Jedi Order. And I think they had an author, but who backed out. And if they did, I understand why. But then they called me up in August and said, look, we're in trouble. We got to get this book out for Christmas. We know you can write fast. Can you pause Demon Wars, which I was writing for them? And also I had to get permission from Wizards of the Coast because I was working back with Drizz at the time. And they said, can you pause it and can you get us a book? We'll tell you the basic beats that we need in the book. And so, I mean, Del Rey had saved my life. I was out of work and I was going to have to sell my house and I was going to have to change my lifestyle. My whole family's lifestyle was about to dramatically change. I owed them and I loved working with them. So I said, all right, I'll do this. I'm a Star Wars fan. I mean, from the movies, the original movies. I remember I was 18 years old when that Star Destroyer came over my head and I almost fell out of my chair because we were sitting right down front. So I was like, all right, yeah, I'll do it. And so they told me about the Vong and this new Jedi Order thing that they were trying to do. And there's really there wasn't that much. They said the Vong based in organic. And we want you to do a story that has to include all these characters and you have to do X, the Vong get into the galaxy, X, Y, and Z. It's a Pyrrhic victory for the heroes. So basically in their storyline from A to Z, I was going from A to B plus, right? But they didn't give me any details. All of how to do it, what kind of fight, even developing the Vong was left up to me and then the subsequent authors who worked on that series. So again, this was around the time I was writing Mortalis as well. My life was pretty busy with other stuff, with bad stuff. But it was right before I wrote Mortalis, actually. But we knew what was going on with my brother. So I started writing it and I wrote the outline because we had to be fast. Turn the outline in, sign the contract, turn the outline in. It was on the phone and Sura Stoney from Lucasfilm was like, I really love this. This is exactly what we want. But didn't anyone tell you? You have to kill Chewbacca. And I swore at her. And I said, where do I send the check back? I don't want to do that. But then they convinced me they were doing it for the right reasons. And so I wrote Vector Prime. And I was supposed to start my tour for Vector Prime at the World Trade Center, Barnes and Borders, on October 5th, 1999. And that was the date of my brother's last MRI when we knew he had only a couple of weeks to live. And so we had to cancel the tour. And that was surreal because now you have the Washington Post reporting that I was canceling my tour to stay home and take care of my dying brother. And that was really brutal because I don't think Gary knew he was dying until he read that. It sometimes sucks when people look in on your life. You don't want them to. But then Vector Prime came out and I didn't do the tour. And then the death threats started coming in because I killed Chewie.
You actually got death threats from killing off Chewbacca?
Oh my God, yes. Some person wrote me like 30 or 40 emails. And I don't know how she did it, but somehow she got tears on the page on an email. How do you do that? I'm kidding. But these people were despondent. They were livid. All of a sudden, all my other books started getting 1-star reviews all over the place. It was brutal. And it was, of course, made 100 times worse because I was mourning the loss of my best friend. Other than my wife, I was closer to no one more than my brother. My kids adored him. He introduced me to D&D. He was my big brother. my only brother. I have 5 older sisters and him. And I had to deal with that. And at the same time, show empathy and sympathy to people who were dealing with the loss of a fictional character. And it just didn't seem like much to me at that time. I understand it was. I'm not trying to minimize what that feels like to lose someone you care about. I mean, there are celebrities out there, a couple in particular, if they die before me, it's going to crush me because these things mean a lot to people. But it was hard for me in that mind space to accept that because I was dealing with the real death. And it was brutal. I went into a depression. It took for 2 years, I could barely open my computer and start typing.
Well, now before the death threats, my first assumption would be that getting the gig to novelize the massive worldwide blockbuster Star Wars II: Attack of the Clones helped you get back to work.
I got through it. I have a great support system around me here. I got a call from Del Rey, and they said, "Bob, we're putting in the names. They're doing this, the Attack of the Clones is going to come out, and we want to put your name in as someone that can do the novelization." I said, "No." He said, "Let me think about it, but no, I don't really want to do it. It was just too painful." And then Terry Brooks called me up. He had done the first one, and he goes, "Hey, I just heard you're thinking of not doing it." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Are you nuts? You are going to have so much fun doing this. You're going to get to work with George. You're going to go up to the ranch and you're going to work with George Lucas. How are you saying no to this?" And so I did it. And I'm glad I did because I had an absolute blast working up at the ranch with Lucasfilm again, all the people from Lucasfilm again, because I love them. They were wonderful to me. I made some really good friends up there. I'm still friends with to this day. And I did Attack of the Clones, and I did get to work with George.
What's your perspective on that relationship? The readers sometimes develop with characters. How seriously does the author need to take that when they're making decisions about a character's direction in a series?
It's everything. The thing that kept me going more than anything in this, and I get, I don't know how many emails. It used to be letters, now it's emails or PMs. I get dozens and dozens and dozens of people sharing their stories with me. When I wrote the Sellswords trilogy, I thought that was the redemption arc for Entreri. And it kind of explained why he was who he was and how he was finally able to look in a mirror and not hate himself, not blame himself. But I thought that was it for Entreri. I got dozens of emails from people saying, "You can't end it here." And then they shared their childhood trauma story with me and said, "I need to see Entreri survive and be okay with himself." That's amazing. The power of words is an amazing thing. It's heartwarming. The other thing, you mentioned Misery, Kathy Bates. When in the Legacy, when it looked like Wolfgar died, I was doing a signing, and this guy came up, and he was from a sub base down in Rhode Island, where I was in New London, Connecticut, and one of the guys in the line, I think he still has his uniform. I said, "Oh man, he's jumping around," and as he did, something fell out of his pocket, and he had a wrench, and he goes, "Oh yeah, about Wolfgar." He was just kidding, but the guy, I heard from him later, like about 10 years later, because I do e-signings, and he bought one of my books for my e-sign and said, "Remember me? I'm the guy with the wrench." And we had a big laugh about it, actually, even when it happened, because he wasn't threatening me or anything like that. He was just fooling around.
It is a powerful connection indeed, especially between you and what's become generations of readers by now. Please share a couple of the most inspirational examples of that interaction with readers, if you would.
Just send me an email from someone whose life has become a little bit better because of my work, and I feel like I've done something good, right? When someone sends me an email that says, "I never read a book until," that means I did something good for somebody. When a kid writes to me and says, my wife saw this. I was doing the sign. This happens a lot. And a kid came up and he asked for my autograph. He starts crying. Big guy. He started crying. And he says, "God, I sound like Trump." No, never mind. But this actually happened. He starts crying and he says, "I didn't have any friends in high school. You gave me friends. Thank you." When I wrote The Highwayman, a guy came up to me. This kid, cerebral palsy. And the hero in the story has something very similar. And he says, my son's going to walk, and I'm going to give him this book, and I'm going to tell him there's nothing you can't do. These are, I remember Tracy Hickman called me up. He's in his car, and he's on it, and he and Laura are bawling their eyes out in the back of a limo, a town car, going to their next book signing. A guy had come up to him, a double amputee, gave him his Purple Heart because he had touched that guy so much with his work. That's the armor you wear as a writer. That's what reminds you, I don't give a shit what a reviewer says. I don't care about a 1-star review at Amazon. You write your books for the people that like your books. And if you are so privileged to have your work get into the lives of other people and have a positive effect on it. I feel the same way about things like that I'm sure a school teacher feels like when a kid comes back to the elementary school and says, Mr. Scaramuzzi, that was the one for me. You changed my life. How, or a doctor feels when they get a family through a crisis, or a nurse feels, or a first responder feels, or a cop feels if he rescues someone, or a fireman pulls someone out of a burning building, right? That's on a more visceral and physical level. But that same kind of feeling that you are being allowed, they're paying you money to be able to help other people, or to be able to give, even if it's just to give them entertainment, even if it's just to introduce someone to a reading. It is humbling, it's inspiring, it just feels good. And every author has that. Every author will have those moments, and it feels damn good. And it reminds me why you do this, because the rest of this business will chew you up if you're not careful.
On that very important note, while Forbes noted in that same recent feature that thankfully R.A. Salvatore doesn't have to worry about any of that, for all the waiting and struggling in the pre-book, pre-internet days, he wouldn't trade it for the challenges facing writers in the current market. What are a few guiding points of wisdom you would give those new authors trying to compete in this current market?
It's usually someone says, I have a great idea, and I want you to write it for me. And you can't do that. Ideas aren't the point. Execution is the point. Characters are the point. But aside from that, my advice to anyone who says, I have an idea I want to write, is if you can quit. And if you can't quit, you're a writer. Because if you're a writer, you're never going to be happy. If you're a writer, this is how you're going to make sense of the world. You won't be happy unless you're making sense of the world. So you're cursed as much as blessed. You're a writer. Congratulations. You're not going to sleep much. And then the other thing is the best, just practical advice that, the best storytelling advice that was ever given to me was by Robert Cormier, who's from my hometown. I Am the Cheese, the Chocolate War. Very influential. One of the most influential young adult authors of the 20th century. And Bob told me, character is more important than plot. You can have a great story, but if nobody cares about your characters, there'll be no tension. If people fall in love with your character, you give them a hangnail, they're going to say, ouch. And I think that's something, and I like to see the world through the eyes of the character. That's what's fun for me, to get to know who this person is that I'm creating. And then the most practical advice I can give someone is read your work out loud to yourself. Listen to it. Don't read it and go, blah, 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 blah. You read it like you're actually reciting it, and you'll catch your typos. You'll see if you have verbal repetitiveness. All the little flaws that can kill the flow of a story will be clearer to you if you do that.
That's a great tip. And MS Word actually has a new feature that will read back to you what you've just written for that very purpose.
Just reading it out loud, you catch those things. You can't do it if it's a jumble with crossouts and you can't get the flow. I mean, sometimes if I'm feeling cocky, I'll pick up James Joyce's The Dead, and I'll read the last 4 or 5 pages of The Dead out loud just to listen to it. Not about the story, but just listen to the rhythm of the words that he's writing. And then I'm humbled. And then I said, get back to work. You've got to improve your work, Bob. Improve your work.
Finally, though you write in the fantasy realm, as cliche as this might sound, do you ever stop and reflect back on the fact that you've been able to live your own as a full-time author?
incredibly blessed. I mean, I complain a lot and nobody listens to me, and they shouldn't. I've been lucky, and I've worked hard. And my wife has worked hard. We built this together. My kids are great. They're, one's in med school, another is does a lot of creative work on the side and is a full-time dad. Heading to law school next year, I think, and they're in their 30s, all of them. And my other son is got a great career going in the computer games industry. So I'm very happy. My we've been lucky. We've done well. Everyone's doing well, and I got to do something I love. But beyond that, I got to make my own hours. So I got to watch my kids grow up. I got to be there with all their games and their riding competitions. My daughter was a horse rider, she a hunter jumper. I got to see all of that. I didn't have to get somebody's permission to go to my son's hockey game. I mean, there are other sacrifices you have to make. Like, I have to go to a convention. I'm going to miss so-and-so's birthday. I'm going on book tour. I won't see you for a month, that type of thing. But compared to the average job, I mean, I'm a blue collar kid. I was working 40, 60, 80 hours a week my whole life. Compared to that, I got to make my own hours. I got to watch my kids grow up. I got to be there. And it was a wonderful experience.
Mr. Salvatore, it's been both entertaining and educational talking today. Thanks so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.